Wonderful. Welcome everyone to our session on how to build a crystal ball. For anyone who was at the dinner last night, we had a magician who was doing some mind tricks, but managed to successfully guess that someone had thought of the movie Forrest Gump, which was quite impressive. Unfortunately, a lot of us don't have that ability to read people's minds, so we need to work with data, we need to work what we have to get there and to answer these questions. Great, okay, so, sorry, it's not clicking. Okay, perfect. So my name is Kevin O'Farrell, this is my colleague Justine. So we work at Analytic Partners. So we're a global independent marketing analytics company. So we've been specializing in this space for the last 25 years. And what we do is commercial analytics. Think of marketing mix modeling, but essentially going broader, going deeper, and going faster. So building out tools to get to those results, to get to those answers. We really go beyond marketing, so it's more holistic. We're looking at multiple KPIs, and it's really an overall system of insights. So we really build out a very detailed history of your business to understand those different drivers, but that's just the starting point. That lets us understand what's happened in the past. What starts to get really interesting is, how do we use this? How do we use this to navigate through uncertainty? So I guess the first question is, how many of you experience uncertainty in your business? Okay, we've got the right room. And I think what's fascinating over the last few years is just that rate of uncertainty, how it's been accelerating. There's a lot of it in terms of technological change. We had talks this morning about AI, war, recession, inflation, being a constant challenge. We'll share some charts earlier in terms of that huge fluctuation of the UK economy going from growth to recession, growth to recession. Consumer changes in terms of patterns, in terms of behaviors, and something called COVID, which hopefully doesn't come back in any meaningful way, but which has been quite disruptive to a lot of businesses. The EU Commissioner on the economy has really called out, these different changes having this big impact. So it's, a reality that we have to navigate. Some of the questions we get as a business are, how do we make the most of our budget? Do we do the same or with less budget? What do we do if there's significant supply chain issues, which a lot of people have faced? What if prices go up and consumers trade out of the category? Or, what if we cut our budget, but our competitor doubles down? These are all questions we've received from people we work with, really significant challenges that they're facing. So we've distilled down a lot of these learnings in terms of how do we face this uncertainty, how do we work it, and we've come up with different ways of building out scenarios and working through this. One quote we really like is from the CEO of IKEA, who said he laughs at the time when you're able to sit down, work out a budget, and then argue if it's within 0.3% of that overall target. Those days are unfortunately long gone. We've moved from a place of having one likely scenario to, unfortunately, lots of different potential ways that the business can go, that the company can move. So that's really what we're building out here with this scenario planning. It's moving from this one most likely future to planning out a number of possible different scenarios. So mapping out these different elements in terms of what's going on with the category, what's going on with consumer behavior, competition, interest rates. So mapping out these different elements so that you've got flexibility as you work through the year, as you work through the plans. And what we've seen is that businesses that really use scenario planning have significantly higher returns on that same investment by having these different scenarios and by having that agility to work through it. Okay, so to step into this in a bit more detail. Some of the big learnings we have, and I like to think of this in terms of a car journey, in terms of setting out the different scenario. It's, picking the destination, selecting that one KPI or those key KPIs to the overall business, so having that destination. Being holistic, so taking into account the weather, taking into account traffic, taking into account these different elements. It's not just about you in your car, it's about all of these different elements around you in terms of that scenario. Then you really need to prioritize in terms of those key elements. What time do we want to get there? What route are we going to take? So building out simulations and measuring across this, looking on Google Maps in terms of that overall journey. And one of the key learnings has been to be agile, that things change. There can be an accident, there can be a heavy traffic on a road, so you need to pick a different route. So it's really being agile and working around this. So we're going to step through these different areas and talk through them in more detail.
Right. So let's start digging more under the first one. What is the destination? You probably have many destinations, many places that you want to go. So, we always make sure you have a good KPI, which is both a short-term and a long-term, and maybe even a mid-term KPI as well. This is something we've worked a lot of our customers on, and if you're interested in learning more, we have a QR code at the end that talks what we've done with Colgate. We've worked a lot about it, and one of the key insights they had was understanding that if you know what direction you go, and we're all aligned in what the direction go, then you're better able to navigate the twists and turns of how you want to get there. As opposed to if you're not sure where you're going, every twist and turn on that journey is going to send you for a loop and you get spun around on it. So, question for you. How many of you have an aligned business KPI for next year? Most people. And do you have a target for that KPI? Do you have multiple KPIs? Do you have a primary KPI and a secondary or a tertiary KPI, or do you just have a lot of KPIs? That's almost the first challenge that you need to understand, is about understanding what is the priority of my KPIs. And sometimes having 3 equal KPIs is okay, but we need to make sure that we're scenario planning and optimizing against all those KPIs and aligning the weight between them. Second one we want to talk about is going holistic. Understanding that KPI is probably, especially if it's a high level KPI, not just within your control or with the control of your team and your budget. Assuming many of us here are working on marketing, so there's some elements that are in your control, media, planning, costs, the channels you're investigating. Also, maybe you're tangentially able to control other marketing, price, distribution, operations elements. You're not in your control, but you're at least close to them. But there's a lot of other things that are going to influence you reaching those KPIs that are not in your control. The market context, what your competitors are doing, inflation, pricing changes, weather, seasonality, legislation, supply chain issues. They probably impact you making that KPI, but there's absolutely nothing you can do to control for them. Technology advancements, emerging technologies, advances in data analytics, and also center of everything, the consumer. What does the consumer want? What's the consumer's price sensitivity? What's the cultural demographics for us? All of those are impactful to your KPI. So let's try and understand a little bit more of what we learned from those typical type of drivers. So let's start with a little bit of a quiz. First question here. How often between January 2021 and August 2024 do you think the UK economy has changed between growth and decline? Give you a clue from those numbers, it's a pretty big number. 19 times. And you can see it here. It's been pretty much an up and down shift over time from growth versus decline versus growth to decline. Every single one of those times we've had to pivot and change the scenarios and the landscape that we're operating in. We're also seeing this, bring it back closer to marketing and media, is we've had a huge amount of media inflation. In 2025, anyone want to guess what the forecast for global media inflation is for 2025?
5.5%.
It's actually come down. It actually go down to 3.7. But really, really interesting to see. This is the forecast for 2025. But when you compare it, and you can see the purple bar is the forecast for 2023. The blue bar is actually what happened in 2023. And the green bar is the 2024. Sometimes those forecasts aren't actually what's happening. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the forecast on what the actual impact is having. Although we do see this inflation is definitely happening and it's different across each of the different channels. The other one that we speak a lot about that can have a big impact is on your competitor actions. We got asked this question recently, is that if you have a competitor that's the same size as you, if they double your marketing spend, what's going to be the impact of the brand? On average, it's about 15%. You have no control about what your competitor is going to do. and you're probably not going to know that they're going to do it until they've done it. So how do you account for all these things in your scenario? Because that could have a huge impact on your business. As Kevin said, we've no longer gone from a most likely plan. If you don't have a version 593, you're probably not doing scenario planning right, because you haven't had to adapt to the challenges that are coming. Another big impact, and it's going to particularly hit the UK, but it's going to hit everywhere, is about legislation changes. We also have, we know, and I want to go for context time, go a little quicker, but add net zero coming in for 2030. We have a lot of brands who are having to add additional KPIs in terms of reaching targets. We also have, HFSS is coming in to the UK. Even if you're not a HFSS brand, it's probably going to change the marketplace a lot. So how are we going to be able to navigate that and understanding we have maybe some big brands shifting into different channels or not able to advertise post watershed? Again, these are not under your control, but are going to impact you being able to reach your KPI. Retail media. 1 in 5 pounds in the UK is spent on retail media in 2025. The third wave, traditional media, digital media, retail media. We're learning a lot about retail media, but there's a lot of gaps behind it. We're seeing that retail media in particular was first thought to just impact that individual reader. It's a lower funnel activity, is just driving that impact. But we're actually seeing it now halo onto a lot of other sales channels as well. Like when you're advertising, for example, we have some case studies from Amazon, that when you're advertising on Amazon, not all the impact is on Amazon, it's actually on the rest of your business as well. And as the retail media networks are growing, understanding about how we're consuming media and how customers are consuming media is going to become more impactful. Your customer needs to be one of the most important pieces of it. Customers are changing. Customer landscape is changing. This is an interesting one. According to Barclays data, between September 2024, which of these do you think increased more? Cinema. That customers are spending more going to the cinema than they were on pubs and clubs. We're actually seeing, the impact of on the drinks category from impact of Ozempic is actually having a very negative impact, and it's shifting the way these brands are investing behind it. There is a lot of change in making sure your customer and what your customer wants is the center of all your scenario planning. So with that, I'm going to head over to Kevin to talk a little bit more about how we go to narrowing it down. Now that I've given you a huge list of all the things that you should consider, how do you understand and bring it back down to what you need to incorporate into your scenario plan?
Thanks, Justine. So really the first step is understanding all of those different drivers, but then it's really prioritizing these, going through and having a look, okay, what are the biggest ones that are going to impact me? And then building out your scenarios from those. So we have an example here from a customer in terms of a retailer in Europe, where we went through all of the different factors from inflation through to returns on stock in terms of media budget, media response, different elements. So we stepped through all of these drivers which we knew were having big impacts. We were very clear in terms of the assumptions. It's really a big part in terms of having accurate scenario planning, is being very clear and transparent in terms of what the assumptions are. So setting out 6% inflation, assuming the media budget is going to be stable, that costs are going to go up by 8%, but the response is going to improve from the media mix and from the different optimizations. So being very clear in terms of these different assumptions across those different drivers, and then using this to build out, again, multiple scenarios. But what we really boiled it down to, and to have a clear message back to the business, was what's the worst case scenario and what's the best case scenario in terms of these different elements. So here's an output of this, where we built out the simulation in terms of the base sales, so how much is coming from all of the built up brands, the overall dynamics over the last few years, how much is coming from incremental sales, so how much is coming from media investment, from promotions, these different pieces. And we set this out in terms of the worst case scenario, the best case scenario, and looked at it against their overall goal. And we saw that there was a gap versus where they wanted to be at the end of the year by building out these different scenarios. And then we worked through in terms of, okay, how much additional investment do they need to make in the business to achieve those overall goals, even across the different scenarios. So a very nice use case in terms of here's where the business wants to get to, here are different routes, but to get there, we do need to step up investment. We do need to change what we're doing to get to that place.
I think just to add to that, one of the things that you do when you're presenting that your best and your worst case scenario, and you're presenting it to anyone in finance, they're going to ask, what about this? What about this? What about that? And being able to incorporate as many of those into that worst case scenario gives you confidence and then often gives you a direction to then be able to understand what's a middle ground scenario. And that's really one of the best things that we have on this example here is about being very clear and transparent. What are the assumptions they're making? And understanding they are assumptions and we're probably going to have to change them over time, but making sure they're built in and you're transparent about them.
And this is really the key way of navigating that uncertainty. It's by setting out the different scenarios, being very transparent in those different assumptions. The last learning we had was about being agile, as in things are constantly changing, as we know, but we have the different scenarios. We can tweak those different assumptions. As Justine said, if you're not on scenario number 296, then you're probably doing something wrong as you work through the year. But yeah, these were our key learnings in terms of building out simulations and working through those different scenarios. So just want to say thank you all very much.